Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? This time we're going to explore the fascinating world of Fyodor Dostoevsky, specifically his prison years. We'll be using his book, The House of the Dead, as our guide. But with a twist. Instead of just summarizing the story, we're going to look at how the book came to be and what that tells us about the man who wrote it.
Oh, that's an interesting approach, because The House of the Dead isn't a straightforward autobiography, is it? It's actually a fictionalized account, woven from the experiences of a mysterious former prisoner named Alexander Petrovich. His writings form the core of the book.
It's like a story within a story, right? We're reading a fictionalized account filtered through another writer's discovery of Petrovich's notes, and those notes. The scenes from the House of the Dead, as Petrovich called them. They offer us a glimpse into a world that profoundly affected Dostoevsky.
Absolutely. And you can see just how deeply by reading his own words. In a letter to his brother, Dostoevsky describes those 4 years of imprisonment as pure agony, a time when he felt completely buried alive.
Wow. Buried alive. That's a powerful image. It really gets at the sense of despair and isolation he must have felt, but better. Was this entirely due to the prison experience? Or did his earlier struggles also play a role? The translator's introduction sheds some light on his pre-prison writings, which were already exploring some pretty dark themes.
That's true. Dostoevsky's early work often focused on, dreams of individuals oppressed by a hostile social environment. Dreams that often led to a detachment from reality, almost as if his characters were seeking refuge in fantasy, because they couldn't cope with the harsh realities around them.
So if his characters were escaping into fantasy, how do you see that connecting to Dostoevsky's own life at that time?
Well, remember that before his arrest, Dostoevsky was involved in political activism. He was part of a group that discussed utopian socialist ideas, which ultimately landed him in trouble with the authorities.
Wow.
One key figure in this group was Nikolai Spetsnov. He was a radical thinker who advocated for revolutionary change. Spetsnov's ideas seem to have had a profound impact on Dostoevsky's thinking at the time, and he even later appears as a character in Dostoevsky's novel Demons.
Really?
It's as if Dostoevsky was grappling with the allure and potential dangers of these radical ideas.
So he's wrestling with those big questions about social change.
Yeah.
And the potential for violence. And then his arrest happens, which, as the introduction suggests, was a major turning point for him, almost like a spiritual awakening.
You could definitely interpret it that way. His mock execution. Remember, he was sentenced to death but pardoned at the very last moment. It was a profoundly traumatic event. You can imagine how that experience might have felt like a symbolic resurrection from the dead, forcing him to confront his own mortality and the meaning of life.
Yeah, I can see that.
And this theme of redemption and personal transformation, of rising above suffering, it becomes a recurring motif in his later works. It's hard not to see the seeds of those ideas being planted during his prison years.
Okay, so we're beginning to see how these early experiences, his political activism, and then the shock of his arrest, might have shaped his later writing. But let's shift our focus a bit now and step inside the prison walls. What kind of details do we get from Petrovich's notes about what daily life was actually like in the House of the Dead?
Well, Petrovich's descriptions are incredibly vivid. Even the arrival scene paints a stark picture. New prisoners had their heads shaved, but in different ways, creating this strange sense of uniformity while also highlighting their individuality. And their clothing was a patchwork of mismatched fabrics. Petrovich notes how this created a sense of dehumanization, stripping away their identities from the moment they entered.
Wow, that's a really powerful observation. You can almost feel the weight of that dehumanization, that loss of individuality. It makes you wonder how they coped with that on a daily basis. Were there any aspects of the daily routine that surprised you?
One thing that struck me was the emphasis on work, even though it was often meaningless and incredibly difficult. For example, the convicts were tasked with breaking up old barges on the frozen river, even though the wood was practically worthless.
So they were essentially doing busy work, but why?
The authorities believed that constant work prevented further crime and instilled a sense of purpose in the prisoners. But there's a fascinating contradiction here, because both work and money were officially forbidden within the prison. Despite this, there was a thriving underground economy operating right under the noses of the guards.
Really? How did that work? What were they buying and selling?
Everything you can imagine. Vodka, tobacco, extra food, favors, even information. There's a particularly interesting description of the barman who smuggled vodka into the prison using ox intestines. He would then dilute it with water to maximize profits and have a massive party once he made enough money. Of course, it was incredibly risky. But for some convicts, a taste of freedom, even in the form of illicit vodka, was worth the risk of a flogging.
Wow, that's incredible. To think that this whole elaborate system was operating within the prison walls. It speaks to the resilience and resourcefulness of these individuals, but let's not forget that they were all individuals, each with their own story and personality. Were there any particular characters in Petrovich's account that stood out to you?
There are several. Petrovich seemed particularly drawn to people with strong personalities and unique stories. He mentions Ailey, a Tatar prisoner whom he described as inherently good. Then there was an older man from a religious settlement who maintained his quiet dignity despite being surrounded by thieves. And there's Isai Fomich, a Jewish prisoner whose meticulous observance of the Sabbath, even in prison, amused and intrigued the other convicts.
It sounds like Petrovich was fascinated by the diversity of characters he encountered. Did any of these individuals leave a lasting impression on him?
Ailey's story seems to have resonated with him deeply. Petrovich describes him as someone whose goodness was unshakable, someone who wouldn't change for the worse no matter what life threw at him. It's as if Ailey represented a kind of moral compass within the prison, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, good can still exist.
It's a powerful reminder that even in such a dehumanizing environment, those glimmers of humanity can shine through. And speaking of humanity, was everyone as accepting of each other? Were there divisions within the prison population?
There were definitely divisions. Petrovich mentions that the Polish political prisoners kept themselves apart from the Russian convicts, viewing them with disdain, a feeling that was mutual. This highlights the complexities of their situation. Even in prison, social and political divides persisted, adding another layer of tension to their already challenging existence.
So even within those walls, the outside world, with all its prejudices and conflicts, was still present. It makes you wonder if those tensions ever boiled over into something more.
They did. There's one incident Petrovich describes that really highlights the power dynamics within the prison. It starts with a convict complaint. This complaint really gives you a sense of the simmering tension. Beneath the surface of prison life, Petrovich described how the convicts had been grumbling about their food for days. It was poor quality, the portions were meager, and they were hungry.
Yeah, I can only imagine how frustrating that must have been, especially given the harsh conditions they were already enduring. Was it just the bad food that sparked the complaint, or was there something more?
Well, a rumor had been circulating that a prison inspector was due to arrive. Some of the convicts saw this as an opportunity, a chance to voice their grievances to a higher authority, and maybe improve their situation.
So they saw a chance to appeal to someone with more power. Did they have any specific demands or requests, or was it more of a general outpouring of frustration?
There were definitely specific complaints about the food, but it also went deeper than that. You can sense a feeling of injustice simmering beneath the surface. Petrovich mentions they were particularly upset about leftover flour being confiscated. They'd meticulously collected it to sell and supplement their meager rations.
It sounds like a classic case of the straw that broke the camel's back. This small injustice, on top of everything else, pushed them to take a stand. Did all the convicts join in the complaint, or were some hesitant to speak out?
There were definitely those who held back, afraid of the consequences. Speaking out against authority in a place like that could lead to serious punishment. Others were resigned to their fate. They felt complaining would be futile, that nothing would change.
A combination of fear and apathy. It's a powerful tool of control in any oppressive system. Where did Petrovich stand on all of this? Did he participate in the complaint?
Petrovich describes feeling like an outsider during the whole ordeal. He was so absorbed in his own thoughts that he didn't even realize what was happening at first. When he finally did join the others, he was met with mockery and insults. They called him Iron Nose and Fly Swatter, taunting him for his privileged background as a nobleman.
Wow, that must have been jarring. Here he is, imprisoned alongside these men, trying to understand their world, and yet he's still seen as an outsider. Different. Did that experience change his perspective at all?
It certainly highlighted the deep divisions between Petrovich and the other convicts. He realized that no matter how much he tried to empathize with them, to see the world through their eyes, he would always be perceived as different.
That sense of isolation is palpable in his writing. It makes you wonder if he ever truly felt a sense of belonging in that environment. But let's get back to the complaint itself. How did the authorities react to this act of defiance?
Well, the man in charge of the prison, was furious. He stormed into the yard, red-faced and half-drunk, ready to assert his authority.
That doesn't sound promising. Did he at least listen to their grievances? Did they get a chance to explain their side of the story.
He did allow one of the convicts, a man named Shishkov, to speak on behalf of the group. Shishkov tried to articulate their grievances respectfully, but the major wasn't interested.
It's a stark illustration of the power dynamics at play. These men had no real recourse, no way to challenge the system that controlled their lives. What happened next?
The major launched into a tirade, accusing the convicts of being ungrateful and rebellious. He even threatened to have them all flogged. In the end, the complaint achieved nothing, except for reinforcing the existing power structure within the prison.
It's a reminder that even in a place designed to punish, these men were still subject to the whims of those in power. Did this incident have any lasting impact on the prison atmosphere? Did things change after that?
There was a definite shift. A sense of unease settled over the prison. Petrovich mentions that even though the convicts had backed down, the resentment lingered. That brief act of defiance may have been squashed, but had awakened something in them, a desire for change, for something better.
It makes you wonder if the authorities realized the potential consequences of that moment. Even in that oppressive environment, the human spirit, the yearning for something more, could not be completely extinguished. Speaking of the human spirit, amidst all this hardship, Petrovich also describes some surprisingly lighter moments. He writes about the convicts' attempts to celebrate Christmas.
That's right. Christmas in prison offers a fascinating glimpse into their lives. It shows how they attempted to create some sense of normalcy, of celebration within that confined world. Imagine that. They looked forward to special food, to singing songs together, to connecting with something beyond the prison walls.
It speaks to the power of tradition and the human need for connection, even in the darkest of places. What specific traditions or rituals stood out to you?
There's one detail I found particularly interesting. They divided the holiday offerings with meticulous care. A convict named Akim Akimich, a stickler for rules and order, oversaw this process. He was determined to ensure fairness and prevent any accusations of favoritism.
It's as if they were creating their own systems of order and justice within the prison, a microcosm of society itself, with its rules and rituals.
Exactly, and it extended to their emotional lives as well. Petrovich mentions how the arrival of drunkards after the major departed on Christmas Day created a sense of relief, a release of tension. It was as if everyone could breathe a little easier, let their guard down for a moment, and express their true feelings.
Those moments of release must have been precious, a brief respite from the suffocating atmosphere of the prison. Did Petrovich participate in these festivities? Was he swept up in the Christmas spirit?
He describes observing the celebrations with a mix of curiosity and detachment. An outsider looking in, as he often was, he mentions the singing of both mournful and celebratory songs, which is interesting. It highlights the contrast between the joy of the occasion and the somber reality of their situation.
That's a poignant observation. It suggests that even in moments of celebration, the weight of their imprisonment was always present. Were there any songs that particularly resonated with Petrovich? Did he mention any specific lyrics?
He recounts a convict song about the daily routine of prison life, which really captures the drudgery of their existence. It begins with the lines, "The sky with light begins to glisten, reveille on the drum does sound, the headman tries the door bolt, listen, the tally clerk is coming round."
Wow. It paints such a vivid picture of their reality, doesn't it? You can practically hear those sounds, feel the oppressive routine closing in around them, even in those moments of reprieve. That stark reality was never far away. And speaking of finding moments of escape, Petrovich also describes something truly remarkable, a prison theater. Amidst this grim reality, they found ways to create and perform. It's fascinating.
The prison theater is one of the most memorable aspects of the book. It showcases their incredible resilience, their ability to create art and find meaning even within those walls.
What kind of plays did they put on? What were they trying to express through these performances?
They staged two very different productions. The first was a satirical vaudeville called Filatka and Maroshka, which was a hilarious parody of social conventions and societal norms. The second play, Kedril the Glutton, was far more intriguing. It was a mysterious piece passed down through oral tradition, and its origins remain shrouded in mystery.
It's incredible that they were able to create such elaborate productions. Given their circumstances, did they have costumes, sets, props? How did they manage to pull it off?
They used whatever they could find to create costumes and props, even borrowing clothes from townspeople who lived nearby. Petrovich mentions they even hoped to get their hands on an officer's uniform for one of the characters. Can you imagine that? Seeing one of their own dressed as a symbol of authority? The subversive humor must have been incredible.
That's brilliant. It would have been a way to poke fun at the system, to momentarily turn the power dynamics on their head. What about the audience? How did the other convicts respond to these plays?
The prison theater was a major event. Convicts from all the barracks crowded in to watch. You can sense a feeling of shared experience and camaraderie in Petrovich's descriptions. For those few hours, they were transported to another world, a world of laughter, drama, and escape.
It must have been a much-needed respite from the monotony and drudgery of daily life. Were there any standout performances that Petrovich describes in detail? Any actors who particularly captivated the audience?
Several moments stand out. Petrovich talks about Nitsvetaev, a convict whose skill at twirling a cane mesmerized everyone. And then there was Ivanov, whose comedic portrayal of a wealthy, charitable woman, known as the Lady Bountiful, had the audience roaring with laughter.
It's inspiring that these individuals were able to find such creative outlets in such a restrictive environment. What was Petrovich's take on the significance of the prison theater? What did it mean to him and to the other convicts?
He saw it as a powerful testament to the human capacity for resilience. It showed that even in the bleakest of circumstances, the desire to create, to express oneself, can endure. The plays gave the convicts a temporary escape from their reality. They were able to explore different roles and emotions, and to connect with something beyond their immediate surroundings.
It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? It speaks to the enduring power of art and storytelling, to transcend our circumstances. But, as you said, these were just brief moments of respite. Petrovich also gives us some chilling insights into the darker side of prison life, the arbitrary nature of power, and the various forms of punishment inflicted on the convicts.
Yes, his descriptions of those punishments are incredibly disturbing. It's clear they left a lasting impression on him, and they offer a glimpse into Dostoevsky's own views on social injustice and the abuse of power.
This brings us back to that central question. How did his time in prison influence his later writing? Can you give us some specific examples of the punishments Petrovich describes?
Petrovich focuses on specific individuals who represent the different faces of authority within the prison system. One such figure is Zerebyatnikov, a cruel officer who took sadistic pleasure in devising torturous punishments.
It's hard to comprehend how someone could derive such joy from inflicting pain on others. It's a reminder that sometimes the people in positions of authority are the most dangerous. Did Petrovich give any specific examples of Zerebyatnikov's cruelty?
One chilling example involves a trick he would play on the convicts during floggings. He'd convince them to run as fast as they could while being whipped, claiming it would lessen the pain. This was a lie, of course. The convicts would collapse in agony after just a few steps, and Zerebyatnikov would just roar with laughter, finding their suffering endlessly amusing.
Oh my gosh, that's awful. Did Petrovich mention any other figures of authority who wielded their power in such a cruel and arbitrary way?
He also describes Smekalov, an officer with literary vanity, as Petrovich puts it. He would make each prisoner recite a prayer, and then interrupt them at a specific word, ordering the soldiers to flog them.
It's like he was using punishment as a form of entertainment, a way to exert his dominance and control over these men. It's no wonder they lived in a constant state of fear and uncertainty. Did Petrovich offer any insights into the psychological effects of these punishments? How did the convicts cope with such brutality?
He describes their reactions with a detached tone, almost matter-of-factly. As if to highlight the ways they tried to deal with the physical and emotional trauma, some withdrew into themselves, becoming silent and withdrawn, others trying to laugh it off or downplay the severity of their injuries. They had to find ways to protect themselves, to shield themselves from the full weight of their suffering.
That emotional detachment is heartbreaking. It shows just how deeply the prison system was designed to break them, not only physically but emotionally as well.
And yet, amidst this bleakness, Petrovich notes something surprising, a lack of vindictiveness in the way the convicts recounted their experiences. It's as if they understood, on some level, that the real enemy was the system itself, not necessarily the individuals carrying out its orders.
That's a really interesting observation. It suggests a level of empathy and understanding that transcends their own personal suffering. Did any of the punishments Petrovich describes involve executions?
He doesn't go into specific details about executions, but he does offer some chilling observations about the executioner. He describes the fear and awe surrounding this figure, the rituals of his role, and the psychological distortion it revealed.
The executioner becomes a symbol of the ultimate power of the state, doesn't he? He embodies its capacity for violence and control. It must have been terrifying to live under the constant threat of that power.
Exactly. And Petrovich mentions that even the most hardened criminals would try to bribe the executioner, hoping he would go easy on them. It shows just how pervasive the fear surrounding this figure was.
It makes you wonder what it must have been like for the executioner himself to be both feared and reviled, to carry the weight of that responsibility. It's a reminder that even in a system designed to punish, there are always complex human stories playing out on all sides. But let's shift our focus back to those who found ways to resist, to find moments of joy amidst the darkness. You mentioned Baklushin earlier, the perpetually cheerful storyteller who played a key role in the prison theater.
Baklushin is a fascinating character. He represents the spirit of defiance, the refusal to be completely subdued by the system. Petrovich describes him as a master storyteller, someone who could captivate his audience, with tales of adventure, humor, and even rebellion.
Baklushin's stories clearly resonated with the other convicts. Why do you think that was?
I think his stories allowed them to momentarily escape the confines of the prison. They could laugh, they could be transported to another world, and they could even vicariously experience a sense of rebellion through his tales.
That makes sense. Humor and storytelling can be powerful tools of resistance, even in the most oppressive environments. Did Petrovich share any of Baklushin's stories in detail?
He mentions one particularly memorable tale about an encounter with a German officer, Baklushin, in a moment of daring, had pulled a pistol on this officer, threatening him just to see if he was truly a man of integrity, as he put it.
He pulled a gun on an officer. That's incredibly risky. What is he trying to prove?
I think it was a way for Baklushin to test the limits of authority, to challenge the officer's perceived sense of superiority. He was, in his own way, refusing to be completely controlled, to be reduced to just another prisoner.
It's a reminder that even in the most restrictive environments, there are always ways to resist, to assert your own individuality. Did the officer react as Baklushin expected?
Apparently, the officer insisted he wasn't afraid, but Baklushin could tell he was lying. He describes how the officer didn't even dare to move his head away from the pistol. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about the power dynamics at play.
It's a reminder that even in the most oppressive systems, there are always cracks, moments where those in power can be challenged, even if just for a fleeting moment.
Exactly. And those acts of resistance can take many forms. Sometimes it's a well-timed joke, a whispered story, or even, as Petrovich describes next, a daring escape attempt.
You're referring to the attempt by Kulikov and AV, right? The plan to break free from the prison walls. It's a moment of high tension in the book.
Yes, this escape attempt gives you a glimpse into the convicts' desperation, their yearning for freedom. Petrovich really sets the scene, building up the tension as he describes the secretive planning. What's particularly interesting is the involvement of a seemingly unlikely accomplice, a convict named AV.
What made AV such an unexpected choice?
AV was known for his intelligence and cunning, but he was also incredibly cynical and self-serving. Petrovich suggests he saw the escape as a chance to improve his own situation, to change his fortune.
So he was in it for himself, not out of any sense of loyalty or camaraderie. Did Petrovich go into detail about their plan?
He outlines the basics. They enlisted the help of Caller, a prison guard, who agreed to help them slip out during a work detail.
That's incredibly bold. Did they manage to pull it off?
Sadly, no. They were caught and brought back to the prison. Petrovich doesn't dwell on the details of their capture, but he does highlight something interesting, the reactions of the other convicts.
What do you mean? How do the other convicts react to the failed escape?
Initially, there was admiration for their daring. But once the attempt failed, that admiration quickly turned to scorn. It's almost as if they were disappointed that the escape hadn't succeeded, perhaps even envious of their brief taste of freedom.
It's a complex emotional response. Why do you think they turned on Kulikov and AV so quickly?
Perhaps it was a sense of betrayal. The failed escape shattered their collective hope. It reminded them of the futility of their situation, of how trapped they truly were.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it, to have that flicker of hope extinguished so brutally. It's a reminder of the psychological toll that imprisonment takes, how it can erode even the strongest bonds of camaraderie.
But even amidst that despair, Petrovich still manages to find moments of beauty and meaning in the connections he forges with his fellow convicts.
That's one of the things that makes the House of the Dead so powerful, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Even in this bleak environment, there are still glimpses of humanity shining through.
Absolutely. Petrovich describes how, over time, he earned the respect of many of the convicts. They came to see him as a good man, someone who treated them with kindness and understanding, despite his different background.
It's a testament to the enduring power of human connection, the ability to find common ground even in the most unlikely of places.
And speaking of unlikely places, Petrovich also describes some of the unexpected creatures who shared their prison world.
You're talking about the animals, right?
Mm.
It's surprising to think about animals living within the confines of a prison.
It is. He mentions a horse named Nedko, a dog named Sherrick, and even a wounded eagle that was brought to the prison.
Wow. It's amazing they were allowed to keep pets in such a harsh environment. What role did those animals play in the lives of the convicts?
They provided comfort, companionship, a connection to something beyond the prison walls. Petrovich describes how the convicts would gather around the animals, pat them, feed them, even train them to perform simple tasks. It's heartwarming to imagine these moments of tenderness in such a brutal setting.
It's as if the animals offered a reminder of the simple joys and beauties of life that still existed outside their confined world. They provided a link to something larger than themselves, something beyond the walls and the guards.
Yes, and Petrovich describes their interactions with the animals with a real tenderness, a stark contrast to the brutality of their surroundings. It's as if these creatures brought out a humanity and compassion that was often lacking in their interactions with each other.
It makes you wonder what it was about those animals that allowed the convicts to express that softer side of themselves. Perhaps it was the animals' innocence, their lack of judgment, or simply their ability to offer unconditional affection.
Perhaps. But sadly, even this connection to the outside world couldn't last forever. After 4 long years, Petrovich's time in prison came to an end.
His release must have been an incredible moment, to finally step outside those walls, to breathe free air again.
He describes it as a resurrection from the dead.
Wow. Those words carry so much weight, especially considering his mock execution earlier. Did he describe any specific thoughts or feelings he had upon leaving the prison?
He mentions the convicts' farewell. Their words were curt, gruff, but somehow also pleased. It's a really poignant detail, suggesting a mix of emotions on both sides. Sadness at the parting, relief that he was finally free.
I imagine it must have been a bittersweet moment, filled with complex emotions. He was leaving behind a world he had come to know, a world that had shaped him in profound ways. Did he offer any reflections on how those years in prison had changed him?
He doesn't go into specifics, but the final lines of the book offer a clue. He talks about the glorious moment of freedom, the restoration of the divine gift of personality.
That's a powerful image. It suggests that prison had stripped him of his sense of self, his individuality, and that freedom meant reclaiming his identity, his place in the world.
Exactly. And that theme of redemption, of personal transformation, runs throughout Dostoevsky's later work. It suggests that his prison years had a lasting impact on his writing, on his entire worldview.
So, we're seeing a clear connection between his lived experience and the themes he explores in his writing. Before we delve deeper into those themes, I'd like to step back for a moment and consider the structure of the book itself. We've been talking about Petrovich's account as if it were Dostoevsky's own. But remember, The House of the Dead isn't written as a straightforward memoir. It's a fictionalized account. Why do you think Dostoevsky chose to present his experiences this way?
That's a great question. By creating the character of Alexander Petrovich and presenting the story through his voice, Dostoevsky was able to achieve a certain level of distance from his own experiences. It allowed him to explore those difficult themes, suffering, injustice, the complexities of human nature, without directly implicating himself.
So it's a layer of protection, a way to process those traumatic experiences through the filter of fiction. It also allows the reader to enter the story without the preconceived notions they might have about Dostoevsky himself.
Yes, exactly. We're able to experience the world of the prison through fresh eyes, through the eyes of someone we're only just getting to know. It adds a layer of mystery and intrigue to the narrative.
And it also raises questions about the reliability of the narrator. We're constantly reminded that we're getting this filtered version of events, which makes us more aware of the subjectivity of experience and memory.
That's a key point. It makes us, as readers, more active participants in the storytelling process. We're constantly questioning what's real, what's imagined, and what's been left unsaid.
Which brings us back to the themes themselves. Now that we've explored the context and the structure of the book, let's delve deeper into some of the key themes that Petrovich, and by extension Dostoevsky, explores in The House of the Dead. What are some of the most prominent themes that stood out to you?
One of the most striking themes is the arbitrary nature of authority and the abuse of power. We see this not only in the cruel punishments inflicted on the convicts, but also in the petty rules and regulations that govern their every move.
It's like the prison system itself becomes a microcosm of the larger society, doesn't it? It reflects the power imbalances and injustices that exist in the outside world.
Exactly. And Petrovich highlights this through his detailed descriptions of the various figures of authority within the prison. We see how their positions of power can warp their personalities, leading them to act with cruelty and indifference toward those under their control.
We've seen this with characters like Zerojatnikov and Spekulov. Their behavior is a chilling reminder that power can corrupt. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. But amidst all this darkness, Petrovich also illuminates moments of human connection and compassion. We see this between the convicts themselves and in their relationships with the animals who share their world.
Absolutely. His descriptions of those moments are incredibly moving. They serve as a counterpoint to the brutality that surrounds them. We see acts of kindness, empathy, and even love emerge in the most unexpected places.
It's as if those acts of humanity are a form of resistance against the dehumanizing effects of the prison system. They remind us that even in the darkest of places, the human spirit can find ways to connect and create meaning.
Precisely. And that's one of the most powerful takeaways from the House of the Dead. Despite all the suffering and despair that Petrovich witnessed, he never loses sight of the convicts' humanity. He sees their flaws, their struggles, their moments of both weakness and strength, and he presents them with a compassion and understanding. That transcends the judgment and condemnation often directed at those labeled criminals.
That's such an important point. He doesn't shy away from their flaws, but he also recognizes their inherent humanity. He sees them as complex individuals, not just as criminals, which makes his account all the more powerful and all the more relevant to our own lives.
It certainly does. And it reminds us of the importance of seeing the world through the eyes of those who are different from us, to try to understand their experiences, their struggles, and their hopes.
Empathy is such a crucial element in navigating a world that often seems intent on dividing us. But before we lose ourselves in these profound reflections, I have to ask, what about Petrovich himself? We've been so focused on his experiences and observations, but what ultimately becomes of him? What happens to him after he leaves the prison?
That's the question that lingers, isn't it? The narrator reveals that Petrovich died alone, shortly after his release. We never learn the details of his death, or even his full name.
So even the man whose story lies in the heart of the book remains an enigma. There's something both tragic and beautiful about that.
It adds another layer to the book's exploration of identity and memory. We're left to wonder, who was Alexander Petrovich? What were his dreams? What happened to him after he left the prison?
It's almost as if Dostoevsky is inviting us to imagine the life that existed beyond the pages of the book, to consider how those experiences might have shaped Petrovich's perspective, just as his own imprisonment shaped his key.
Exactly. The House of the Dead is a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it. It forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the systems we create.
But it also offers those glimmers of hope, of resilience, of the enduring power of the human spirit. It reminds us that even in the darkest of places, even within the confines of a prison, we can find connection, meaning, and even beauty.
And ultimately, that's what makes this book so powerful, so enduring. It's a testament to the human capacity for both darkness and light, for both cruelty and compassion. And it challenges us to look for those glimmers of humanity, even in the most unlikely of places.
But before we get too philosophical, there's one more thing I'd like to touch on. The concept of luckability, which Petrovich mentions several times in his account.
Ah, yes. Luckability. It's a fascinating concept, and one that's central to understanding the mindset of the convicts.
Could you explain it for our listeners who might not be familiar with the term? What does it mean in the context of the prison?
Luckability, as Petrovich uses it, refers to a kind of fatalistic belief in luck or fate. It's the idea that your destiny is predetermined, that you have little control over what happens to you. In a way, it's a coping mechanism, a way for the convicts to deal with the harsh realities of their situation.
That makes sense. When you're trapped in an oppressive system, when your life is controlled by forces beyond your control, it can be comforting to believe that everything is predetermined. It takes away some of the burden of responsibility, the feeling that you could have done something differently.
Exactly. And it also explains why they were so fascinated by gambling, which Petrovich describes in detail. Gambling offered them a chance to test their luck, to momentarily believe that they could influence their fate. It was a way to escape the monotony of their lives and to feel a sense of agency, even if it was just an illusion.
So even in their belief in luckability, they were still searching for ways to exert some control over their lives. to find meaning and purpose in a system that's seemed designed to strip them of those very things.
It's a testament to their resilience, their unwillingness to be completely broken by the system.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into The House of the Dead, I'd like to shift our focus to the broader context of Dostoevsky's work. How does his prison experience, as depicted in this book, inform our understanding of his later novels?
That's a great question. The House of the Dead lays the groundwork for many of the themes and characters that we encounter in his later works. It's here that he begins to grapple with the big questions, the questions that would define his literary legacy, the nature of good and evil, the search for redemption, the complexities of human psychology.
And it's not just the themes, is it? There are also striking parallels between the characters in The House of the Dead and those in his novels.
Absolutely. Many of his later characters seem to be drawn from the individuals he encountered during his prison years. You can see glimpses of Petrovich, Ali, Baklushin, and even the cruel guards like Zerebyatnikov. In the complex and unforgettable characters who populate novels like Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, and the brothers Karamazov.
So The House of the Dead isn't just a standalone work. It's a crucial piece of the puzzle, a key to understanding the evolution of Dostoevsky's thought and his artistic vision.
Exactly. It's a window into his formative years, a period of profound transformation that would shape his entire worldview.
It makes you wonder what his later work might have looked like. Had he not experienced those 4 years in prison, would he still have explored those same themes, created those same unforgettable characters?
It's impossible to know for sure, of course. But one thing is certain. His time in the House of the Dead was a crucible that forged his artistic spirit. It gave him a depth of understanding, a compassion for the human condition. That would become the hallmark of his writing.
And it's that compassion, that ability to see into the depths of the human soul, that continues to resonate with readers today. His work remains relevant because it grapples with timeless questions about morality, suffering, and the search for meaning in a world that often seems devoid of it.
He reminds us that even in the darkest of places, even within ourselves, there's a capacity for both great evil and great good. And it's that tension, that constant struggle, that makes his work so compelling.
It's a journey worth taking. But before we let our listeners go, there's one final question I'd like to pose to them, a question that goes beyond the specifics of The House of the Dead and touches on the very essence of Dostoevsky's work. What does it mean to be truly free?
That's a powerful question to consider. What does it mean to be truly free? It's something Petrovich himself must have grappled with as he stepped back into the world after years of confinement.
It's a question that resonates with all of us on some level, isn't it?
Right.
Are we truly free if we're bound by societal expectations, by our own fears and insecurities, by the systems we live in? Dostoevsky seems to be suggesting that true freedom is not just about physical liberation, but about something much deeper, a spiritual or psychological awakening.
Yeah.
It's about freeing our minds, not just our bodies. That makes me think about Petrovich's observation, about the divine gift of personality. It suggests that prison had stripped him of his sense of self. Maybe true freedom is about reclaiming that sense of self, that individuality.
That's a great point, and it connects to another key theme in Dostoevsky's work, the search for redemption. Many of his characters are burdened by guilt, shame, and a longing for forgiveness. They're searching for a way to atone for their past mistakes and to find a path to a more meaningful existence.
Which brings us back to that central question. What does it mean to be truly free? Perhaps it's about confronting our own inner demons, acknowledging our flaws, and striving to become better versions of ourselves.
It's a lifelong journey, that's for sure. And Dostoevsky doesn't offer any easy answers. His work is more about asking questions, provoking thought, and challenging us to examine our own beliefs and values.
And that's what makes his work so enduring, isn't it? It forces us to confront the big questions about life, death, suffering, and the search for meaning. It's not always comfortable, but it's always thought-provoking.
Absolutely. He doesn't shy away from the dark side of human nature. He explores those depths with a raw honesty. That can be unsettling. But he also shows us the possibility of redemption, of transformation, of finding light even in the darkest of places.
I think that's what resonates with readers, even today. His characters are flawed, they make mistakes, they suffer, but they also strive for something better. They remind us that we're all capable of both great darkness and great light, and that the journey of life is about navigating that tension, about making choices that lead us toward our better selves.
He makes us believe that even in the face of suffering and despair, there's always hope, there's always the possibility of change, of growth, of finding meaning and purpose in our lives.
And that's a message we all need to hear, isn't it? especially in a world that can often feel overwhelming and chaotic. Dostoevsky's work reminds us that even in the midst of darkness, there's always a glimmer of light, a spark of hope, a reason to keep searching, keep striving, keep believing.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into The House of the Dead, I'd encourage you to consider those questions we've been discussing. What does it mean to be truly free? Where you find meaning and purpose in your life? And how can you embrace both the darkness and the light within yourself?
These are questions worth pondering, questions that Dostoevsky's work invites us to explore. The House of the Dead is a powerful starting point, but it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. So, I encourage you to delve deeper into his other works, to see how those themes evolve and expand.
And as you read, pay attention to those details, those small moments of insight that make you pause and reflect. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to challenge your own assumptions, and to allow yourself to be moved by the power of his words.
Because ultimately, that's what a good deep dive is all about, isn't it? It's about sparking curiosity, igniting a passion for knowledge, and empowering you to explore new ideas and perspectives.
So keep questioning, keep digging, and keep the spirit of discovery alive.
Until next time, happy exploring.